I'll just introduce myself for I think a couple of minutes. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Deepak. I'm currently working at Flipkart.com. I lead the charter for games and gamification. So before this, I worked in OTT space, which is like Hotstar, you can think of. Hotstar, Netflix. I actually worked at MX Player, I think one of the biggest OTT platforms in India. I launched the gaming platform there as well. And looked after the growth. And before that, I was working in education tech at upgrad.com, where I was leading growth and products. So, and housing.com is before that. This was back in 2014-15. If some of you remember, housing.com was news for a lot of right and wrong reasons. And it's always an icebreaker to talk about housing, but I'll avoid any kind of statements regarding that in this call. But feel free to ask questions around housing as well, around Upgrad, around MX Player, anything, any questions that you have. There's a Q&A kind of section. You can ask questions. In fact, the participants can actually upvote the questions as well. So please feel free to use that. I have enabled that option, right? Going back, let's start. This is more about all things product market fit, as in the product market fit. There is a series of posts that I've written, like 4 posts in total. This is more of a more of a webinar where I will be talking more around case studies. For those of you who haven't gone through the posts, I have created a concise summary which will give you enough context to actually relate to those stories. But for the most part of this discussion, I think we'll be focusing on the case studies and stories. So I think the first thing that I want to kind of get out of the way is who are you, kind of. The reason this is important is because this will actually help me understand the audience, and I can cater the discussion according to you. So I'm launching a poll that you can take, right? Uh, so the poll is launched. You can go through this poll to answer the following questions. The first is, what is your background? The second is average years of experience. And the third is, how many essays of Growth Catalyst have you read, right? And depending on the audience kind of composition, I will actually try to kind of make this discussion in alignment with that, right? We have already gotten one question. That's good to know. So I will just take 30 more seconds to conclude this poll, and then I will share the results with you guys. Wow, around 80% have voted. Those of you who haven't, you still have 10 seconds, 15 seconds to vote. And this moves 90%. Wow, great participation, folks. I think I'll just use this because this is a representative of the whole attendees. The background, in terms of background, we have around 40% PMs, 40% aspiring PMs. Entrepreneurs, I have 5%, and the rest, 5 to 10% are marketers or other kind of backgrounds. Average years of experience, we have 0 to 2 years around 10%, 3 to 5 years around 35%. Sorry, 0 to 2 years 30%, 3 to 5 years 35%, 6 to 10 25%, and 10 plus is around 10%. So it's good to have the folks who have like the years of experience same as me, because I feel this is I think the right age to learn about this topic, because it's a very evolving topic. And actually kind of you can actually switch your careers in the first 10 years of the job. For those who are more than 10 years, I think this is still important, because you'll be managing teams who actually will be working very closely on these things, all right? And the third one is, how many of you essays have you read so far? I think 15% are one. Wow, this is good. So more than 50% have read like 3 or 4 essays. And there is 15% who have read none of it. So anyway, so good to know. I think let's move to very quickly the introduction about product market fit. Like, you know, there is product and there is market. And the reason we are talking about this topic is because this is the leading cause of startup failures, right? And not just startup failures, any product that you are building, your team is building, no matter who are you, I think your salary is dependent on the product that the product team is building. Uh, like, and the no market need is actually the leading cause of that product market fit, that failure, right? So which is why I think we have started with this topic in Growth Catalyst, because without product market fit, there is no chance that we are going to do any kind of growth. And we will come to that also, why no sort of growth is possible without product market fit. I just want to take 1 minute to talk about the product and the market. I think product, yeah, as you already know, product is something like a Flipkart app or something like a Swiggy app or a Zomato app. Market is basically the whole Indian market we can take. And what we can say is for Swiggy, it could be the market of people who actually order food or go out and eat food, right? For Flipkart, everybody who is buying something, right, is the market for Flipkart. The whole retail sector is a market for Flipkart. And for Zomato, it could be people who go out and eat, but now they have added another market to that, which is you are ordering something because you are lazy and you want the food to come to your home, right? So I think a lot of times the fallacy lies in when we talk about market, we say Indian market or US market, right? We have to go beyond that when you're talking about products. We have to be more specific. We have to be very specific. And we'll talk about this also, like how segmentation helps in actually defining the product market fit and achieving the product market fit, right? But for now, just know that the leading cause of product failures is product market fit, and keep learning about this topic as much as possible, right? Coming to the next question is, okay, so I know it's the leading cause of product failures, but like, what do I do about it? So my first hunch is you have to measure it, right? Because you cannot improve something that you cannot measure. And this is a GIF I like a lot in a lot of circumstances, which is, so there is a chance, right? Like, there is a chance that we can avoid those failures, those terrible quick failures of product and startups, right? So there are three sections of this, like measuring and improving. The first is when you don't have data. The second is when you have data. And the third is when you have data over time, which is in a mature state, right? And I'll briefly cover the three things, which is the first is when you don't have data, right? What you know is you have a hypothesis that there are these people who would like my product, right? So suppose you're a Swiggy launching a kind of food delivery app. You know that there are people who don't like to cook, right? Who go out, but who always say, yeah, I don't want to go out. I don't know, like, let's cook Maggie, right? So this Maggie folks are the target group for you, right? So you don't have a lot of data, but you have assumptions, right? And in this, the way to measure is through surveys, right? And there are two different kind of surveys that you can use. The first one is how disappointed survey, right? This is a survey that I use in the early stages of the product. Even on my blog, I have used this, which is how disappointed would you be if you could no longer use the product, right? And I've written extensively about this survey. Later on also, I have added slides because this is very important to understand. This will help you figure out who are the target audience. This will help you figure out if there is actually a need for your product in the market or it is just an idea in your mind, right? And all these things are very important in the initial phase of the product. The idea is that if you go and take surveys from 100 people, 40 of them should be should be aligned with your product value proposition. Like 40 of them should be very disappointed to not no longer use your product. So that's the first method. The second method is NPS, Net Promoter Score. So you might have come across this survey if you haven't conducted it, which is how likely are you to recommend this to somebody you know, right? Which is, are you a promoter or are you a detractor or are you a neutral person? You don't care, right? What you need is to have this benchmarks, which is in IT companies, you should at least in the initial phases, again, try to hold a benchmark of 40% because that is a median NPS. If you are a very strong company, you will get like 64 or 65% of NPS. The reason you see the difference between the 40% a magic number in disappointed and in NPS it's 65%, because when people say that how likely they are to recommend, they will actually kind of a lot of times they will overestimate themselves, which is why you see the top quartile is 65-70%. They will say, okay, I will recommend, but they will actually not recommend. So there is difference between revealed preference and stated preference. But anyway, like moving very fast, because you have the benchmark, you know what to chase, and you know how to do it, right? Uh, then there is this Satisfy framework that I put in one of the blog posts. And once I share this PPT, I will also share the links with this. So you can go through those blog posts relevant to these slides. But this is something, the reason I created a simple framework like Satisfy is because I have gone through this multiple times and I still don't, I still miss a step or two. And that is a good thing with checklist. I think Atul Gawande, who is a surgeon, he wrote a book around checklist manifesto, right? And he says that using checklist in complex surgeries actually avoided like 40 to 50% of accidents, right? So why can't we kind of take something from medical science and use it in our day-to-day lives? And which is why I said I love like this kind of short abbreviations, because they help you remember and you also don't miss any critical step. So Satisfy is basically you take the survey, the first part. The second is you analyze people who love it, right? And you know the benchmarks. So you know how far you are from benchmark. The third is find who are the people who love it. So for example, for Growth Catalyst, when I did, I saw that aspiring PMs, entrepreneurs, they love this newsletter. But then there are people who have like 15 years of experience in PM, or who are very mature founders, they don't love it, right? Because they have already been through these stages. The fourth is ignore the haters, right? So I'm going to ignore those 15 years plus experience PMs because they are anyway not my TG. The moment I remove them, right, my percentage of people who love actually shifts because I have changed the denominator, right? Then I also kind of modified my pitch by selling what was relevant to these people who loved it, like aspiring PMs and PMs. They found few things. They shared few things in this survey. Ki we love this. So I actually highlighted all those features into why subscribe to this newsletter, right? Uh, and then add features to convert the on the fence. So I think one of the features that is very highly requested is a Q&A, right? So I'm going to launch a Q&A kind of method in this newsletter where you can submit the questions and I will be answering them in 5 minutes and uploading those videos on YouTube channel, right? And then you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can go through that. I will also put it in my weekly newsletter so that you don't have to subscribe to the new YouTube channel if you don't want to, right? But the thing is, this will convert the people who are somewhat disappointed to highly disappointed. And then the fifth, the last one is keep the data young. Now, I cannot operate on the data that I generated 1 month back, 3 months into the product, right? Because a lot of people have changed, a lot of early movers have kind of realized some of the mistakes that I'm making in the product and all that. So you have to do this every quarter at least, right? So Satisfy follow this framework, and I think this is one of the best frameworks. The whole Superhuman founder wrote a blog around this, and how he built this app, his app like Superhuman on this thing, right? And it's extremely successful. Like nobody said that somebody was going to come and challenge Gmail, and that too with a paid app, right? But Superhuman did that. So I think if it can work for him, it can work for all the products that we are building. So this is, I think, the most important slide I want to cover in product market fit. Uh, and then coming to when once you have data, right? So this was before you had data. Now you have data. Keep doing the Satisfy framework, by the way, even when you have data. But now you have a unique challenge, right? You are getting 100 users and 100 of them are going out in 1 month. And this happens with a lot of products, I know. And this happens with very seasoned PMs who launch the products. Like I know people who have 10, 12 years of experience, very good pedigree, very good product understanding, and still they launch the product which are very poor retention, right? So the lost user, which is called churn, is actually somewhere equal to new users, and that creates a big problem because you have to keep adding water, and the water actually costs, because cost per install in India is somewhere between 5 rupees to 10 rupees. So if you have to add 10 lakh users, that means 1 crore expense in a month, right? So that's a very expensive strategy to launch a product. And how do you measure it is also, again, I wanted to share some benchmarks. So this is one thing that I have done. Like in the blog post, I didn't share the benchmarks. In this webinar, I'm sharing benchmarks for NPS, for how disappointed, for the retention curves. Like what should the retention curve look like in terms of data, right? So I think anything above 50%, at day 30 or day 60 or day 90 is very good, right? The curve will flatten after that, as you can see. Anything above 20% in day 30 is medium, like you have a chance of growth. But anything below 20% in day 30 retention is not going to work a lot. So beware of these numbers like 50, 40, 20, right? Remember these numbers, and I think you have a good chance of growing very fast. Then you have data over time, and what you need to shift here is basically define cohorts. Like these people came in January, and this is their retention curve. And these people came in February, and this is their retention curve. And your retention curve should keep moving up, right? If it is going down, that means you are doing something wrong. You are either inviting people who are not your target group, or you are your product is not working anymore. Like maybe you have scaled up, you have done few things, right? But this curve should start keep kind of getting up. Now mind that in the months when you have a lot of acquisition, this will go down, right? Because when you scale up acquisition, what happens is your retention suffers, right? So you have to kind of keep thinking around how to read this number as well, because it will vary as per a lot of factors. But one thing that you can be sure of, that if this curve is moving up or remaining constant, you are moving in the right direction, right? Even when you are scaling up. If it is going down, you need to read through data, segment it, and see which of the segments have higher retention, which of the segments have lower retention. Maybe don't spend money on the segments which have lower retention, right? So segment is the advice when you are measuring PMF with data over time. And this is I think where I will close the theory part, and I will move to the stories and the case studies, which is I don't know like how many of you are superhero movies fan, but I'm a big fan of superhero. I keep referencing them, and this was I think one of the most heartbreaking scenes that happened in superhero movies, apart from I Love You 3000 maybe, right? So you can quote your superhero like heartbreaking moments in the chat if you want to. But I think it was one of the hardest thing to do, and retention is actually one of the hardest thing to do. It is the soul of your product. It is actually the soul stone, right? If you have to remember it that way. And it is one of the hardest thing to move. So don't be disappointed if you're not able to move it up, right? Companies take 6 months to move retention by 5%, 6%, 10%, right? But I think if your retention is very bad, you have to kind of question whether you have actually soul in your product, right? So moving to stories, right? I think we'll learn a lot from stories, and which is why I think if you remember all three of them, you can reference them in whatever stage your product is. All these three are from three different stages of the product, not from the same kind of product. And the reason I did it, because one of them at least will apply to whatever you're doing right now, right? And you can reference this to actually check whether you are doing the right things or you're not doing the right things. The first is the Pepper Tap. Online grocery is hot because of COVID situation, and which is why I wanted to pick online grocery, right? And Pepper Tap as a story, and then we can move to what Swiggy and Flipkart and Amazon, they all are doing right now. But Pepper Tap is where the online grocery started. It started in 2014. It raised $51 million in total. It shut down in 2016, which means that it spent around $100K every day when it was live, right? It was live in 30 plus cities. It got to 20,000 orders daily, right? And the model was very simple. There are supermarkets. What we will do is we will provide the delivery boys. You order through the app. These people will bring the grocery within 2 hours to your house, right? So why did it fail, right? Because like there was funding, there was a very strong team behind it. By the way, like if you see their like founder profiles, they are very strong. So strong team, strong money, but still the product failed, right? And the reason was threefold. The first is the market, right? So I think uh, like the first thing is market, which is tier one users didn't like delivery fee back in 2014. Like Amazon was not charging delivery fee. Flipkart was not charging delivery fee. So people actually didn't like delivery fee. Like in India, people don't like paying for delivery because all this like Kirana boys or moms and dads, they don't charge any delivery fee for getting it through the supermarkets, right? And the second thing is these Kirana stores are anyway kind of, in Mumbai, I was there in 2014, and the simplest way we could do it is call the supermarket, and they will send some stuff to like the society we were staying, right? Uh, same for tier 2, tier 3. I think moms love grocery shopping. They love kind of haggling. That's kind of a game for them. And that's also kind of like grocery shopping. They go on weekends and they take grocery for the home, right? So actually, if you see the market, right, because of delivery fee, there was a utter distaste in the market back in 2014 to 16. Things have changed significantly because now people have become more lazy thanks to Netflix and Facebook and whatever apps, TikTok. Uh, and I think people also have, like in tier 1, the millennials have actually moved to the earning crowd, right? So millennials like to spend things because they are looking towards US or China, where there are apps which are charging for subscription and all, right? The market has evolved. So the market has changed. The second thing that was wrong with was product, right? So think of it like in a market where people are not very tech savvy, you cannot ask Kirana stores to keep updating inventory, right? And if the inventory is not updated, I will order something, but at the end of it, you will not deliver. Like the Kirana store will say that I don't have this thing, right? And they will not deliver it. Also, at this point of time, if you remember back in the days, Ola and Uber drivers had a lot of problem coming to your place, right? So these people will further trouble when they are coming to deliver, because they will say that, okay, I don't know, sir, how to read maps and all that, right? All those things happen. So the product experience, right? When I say product, it does not mean an app, but the product experience was actually broken. And you read through the founder interviews there, and they also said the same thing, that the product experience was broken because the inventory was not updated, the boys were not able to reach the houses, right? So the whole market in terms of tech evolution, in terms of I think liking with delivery fees, uh, and in terms of markets like tier 2, tier 3 was very different from what it is right now, right? Business model was also broken. So you could actually have sustained this whole thing, but the problem was they were losing money on every order, right? So think of it like $100,000 and 20,000 orders means $5 per order you are burning, right? And it's not just on the order, but like add all the costs and mota moti, you're doing like $5 per order, which in India is a big thing. If you're burning 200, 300 rupees per order, right? Sometimes the order is also not for 200, 300 rupees, right? So the question becomes then how do you make money, right? How is it this sustainable? And which is where I think I want to introduce the mathematics of most business models, this is something that will hold true to all the business models, by the way, in one form or other, right? Which is LTV CAC model, right? This is, I think, the fundamental of all business models. The LTV is simply the lifetime value. The CAC is customer acquisition costs, right? And what you need to do is whatever you spend in customer acquisition, you have to recover it. Okay, LTV calculation is very simple. The average revenue that I'm giving you every month, say I'm giving you 10 rupees every month, and the monthly churn, right? So let's say the churn is 10%. So from your one customer, they can expect 10 by 10%, which is 100 rupees, right? And then you have to see if you in 100 rupees, you are able to recover the cost per install, which is marketing cost, the office cost, the logistics cost, and finally, whatever extra cost that you're incurring, right? And if you think from this perspective, right, PaperTab was not charging anything. They were selling just on MRP, right? They were not charging much from this Kirana stores. So the LTV, which is average revenue per users, actually becomes zero, right? So LTV is zero, but there is CAC because for every delivery you are losing, and for every customer acquisition you are losing in marketing. So it's the whole LTV to CAC was actually a very bad equation, and they could never hit break even on that model, right? What will work in this market is if you have very high basket size and you are taking, let's say, 5% of it. So I'm giving like 2,000 rupees ka purchase to a Kirana store, and I'm telling the Kirana store, give me 5% of it, right? If you can crack the cost per install, which is I'm not spending money to acquire a lot of users. The users are already with me, just like in Swiggy, it happens. The users are already there, so I don't have to spend anything in acquisition cost. And then reduce cost per delivery. So for example, if you see in Swiggy, the cost per delivery is low because they're also delivering food, and now they're delivering alcohol, which has a great demand. But see, they are reducing cost per delivery because they are paying these riders a fixed money, let's say 10,000 rupees. And in 10,000 rupees, if they are delivering 100 orders a month, that is basically 100 rupees per order. But if they are delivering 200 orders, that's 50 rupees. So add to that, they are charging delivery cost if the distance is high, right? And now some people are comfortable with that, right? And then there is low churn because Swiggy is kind of getting into a super app model. Uh, I think you'll either order food or order grocery or send something to somebody. Your churn keeps reducing because some of the people will keep you for one use case, some of the people for two use cases, some of the people for all three use cases, right? So you churn. And then go back to the equation. Your LTV is increasing because your ARPU is increasing because you are increasing the use cases for the user and you are reducing the churn. So the ARPU equation, LTV equation shifts, and the CAC is reducing because there is no fixed CAC. The people are already there on your app. There is a variable CAC, but to optimize that, you are charging some delivery fees in some cases. In some cases, you are saying, okay, my LTV increase is actually good enough to let go of this variable cost. So I'll leave that out. All right. So yeah, I think this is the only way, this is not the only way to evaluate the model, but in this way, you'll be evaluated with 90-95% of the business model. So feel free to do so and see which of the apps are actually working in this way or which of them are not. So going with this, I think I have another poll for you guys, right? Ready? Who do you think has the best chance in the groceries market today? First is Swiggy. Second is Big Basket. I've launched the poll. You can go and take the poll. The third is Milk Basket, which is a daily subscription. Daily morning, they will deliver something. Fourth is Amazon and Flipkart, which have a heavy muscle and they are entering into this market, right? So I will take around 30-40 seconds to kind of audience to kind of vote it. Meanwhile, I will just have some water. Wow, Big Basket looks like. And we are close, 90% are voted. So I think 95% have voted and the poll results are, I'm ending the poll. Around 50% feel Big Basket, which owns inventory and delivery, both. Milk Basket, surprisingly only 10%, Amazon or Flipkart around 30% and another 10% Swiggy. This is interesting. I think this is a very debatable topic. If you ask, I think my personal take is it's not clear yet because all the four models have their own advantage. Like Swiggy, in case we saw that ARPU increases and churn decreases and everything. In Big Basket, because you have inventory, your margins are much better. In Milk Basket, because of daily subscription, your delivery costs are very low because every day one guy goes into a society and delivers to everybody, right? In Amazon or Flipkart, you have a lot of money, right? And you have a lot of customer base. Plus, you have the logistics network. So, yeah, it still remains to be seen, but good to know. I think we have a lot of Big Basket fans and Flipkart, Amazon fans. Moving on, I think the first lesson, and this is at the end of the story I kept is because you can't beat the market with team and money. That is, I think that should be absolutely clear. The reason I'm saying is, and don't rely on me. I'm just like a small guy, but I think there was one very particular thing that one of my friends observed last week. His name is Gaurav. He is a founder of BuyHutK and BitBNS, which is a crypto platform. So he said that Apple revenue, right, when Steve Jobs joined in 1997 to 2004, it actually remained almost constant. And in some cases, it actually fell below, right? It was some 5 to 6 billion. Now, Steve Jobs was there for 6 years, right? But still kind of didn't move. And that actually reminded me of one of the books that I was reading, I think a year back, which was Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And the writer actually, the professor, actually in 1998 had a chance to ask Jobs, what is your strategy? And he said, I'm going to wait for the next big thing. And the next big thing, as we know, was, I think, iPod, the iPhone, uh, and they kind of revolutionized the music industry, the PC industry, the smartphone industry, and iPad, right? So I think Jobs also understood the gravity of market, like, and all the big investors, like if you read Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger, they keep saying that you cannot win the market, like the market always wins, and which is why Jobs quote makes a lot of sense, which is we wait for the market to actually have some strategic advantage, like Apple had on hardware, right? When the smartphone market actually moved up, he had an advantage because he was already, they were already manufacturing PCs. They had the whole supply chain integrated. They already had a premium brand, right? So I think that's the one thing that I would like you to remember, which also resonates with PepperTap. I think that back in 2014-15, it was more about the market than the founders in the team. And we have been taught this, right? We have been told that if you work hard, you'll be successful. If you work really hard, you'll be very successful. But that's a fallacy. If you're not working on the right thing, you'll never be successful, right? And the right thing is actually market in this case when it comes to product market fit. Coming to the next story, I think I don't know how many of you are aware of Loco or HQ Trivia. Both are, I think HQ Trivia was US-based app. Loco is India-based app. Flipkart also has a quiz time based on this model only. So it's basically you win cash every day, right? It's a live game show. Think of Kaun Banega Crorepati with Gaurav Sharma. And then think that at a particular time, everybody will come, they will play this quiz show, but not by sitting at the host table. Everybody is on a guest table. Everybody is a guest. Everybody will answer the questions, and whoever answers the quickest gets the prize, right? And it actually caught up, like it caught up very well. So this is some of the news snippets that I got in 2018, right? That Pocket Aces actually acquired this startup. Sequoia had invested $3 million. Pocket Aces acquired it. And they said that we plan to invest $10 million over next 1 year, which is a big commitment, right? And the company was seeing, let's say, peak was around 5 lakh concurrent users during a single game, right? And from there, they have launched multiple games, right? So you'll only think that the average number of players will keep increasing, right? So this was back in 2018. And in 2020, this product has pivoted, right? This has gotten into a gaming company, which is more of like, there are people who are playing the game, and then they will live stream the game and you'll see those games. They also added a lot of other games, right? Uh, so they went, I would not say pivot because it's still the same industry, but they added a lot of features over the years. And still, I think what they're getting is not more than 1 lakh users a day, right? So compare this to basically 2 to 5 lakh concurrent players. And today, I think they're not getting more than 1 lakh users or 2 lakh users a day. And this is just a quick and dirty calculation because a lot of startups don't reveal the numbers. What they revealed was there are 22 million gaming hours spent by users since inception, right? And you divide that uniformly, you get 1.2 million minutes a day. And 10 minutes per user, even if I assume. Normally in gaming apps, it's 20 to 30 minutes per user. But even a very conservative estimate gives you 100K to 120K users per day, right? So this has gone down a bit. And remember that there was a peak. So it might be even, this is the average. So if there was a peak in this average, this might be lower because the whole thing will have to come to average of 120K users per day, right? And I think this is I think they pivoted, right? But for example, HQ Trivia, the same model was not so lucky. So HQ Trivia, if you feel that 2 lakh people playing simultaneously is a big thing, think about HQ Trivia in 2018, when it has 2.2 million, which is 22 lakhs people concurrent, right? 22 lakhs people are actually playing on your app at the same time, right? And come to like 2 years later, it shuts down because the acquisition didn't happen. And the traffic was 67,000 users in 2020 through Sensor Tower, like this is Sensor Tower data. And one of the key differences that you see why HQ Trivia kind of failed miserably, obviously there are other factors like the founder died of drug overdose and all those things, and some other co-founder took over. And a lot of employees had a problem with this co-founder and all that. But beyond that, HQ Trivia didn't do what Loco did, right? Which is keep launching new things, because what happens is the one-time hits, like if even if you get a good PMF metric for one time, which is let's say 2 million people coming to your app playing every day, it is no guarantee that it is not fall through, right? It is not going to hold, and which is why this is my favorite statement about PMF. A lot of people have said that once you achieve PMF, everything is smooth. People come in, they play, pay you, and everything is rosy. But the matter of the fact is PMF isn't a moat, right? Uh, Keep your product close, but market closer, because market is actually your enemy. Product is your friend, and market will actually try to beat you because it will change. The consumers will change, the market will change, the trends will change, the competition will change, and which is why you have to keep your market closer to you, right? And this is a scene which I love in this context, which is you need to keep bringing Thor in that Wakanda's fight. Like people who have seen Infinity War would understand that you need to keep because somebody will break through the barriers that you have, the moat that you have built, and then you need a Thor, which is a new product launch or a new feature, which will actually keep users engaged, right? Uh, Coming to the third and last story, right? So I think the first one was around when you are building a product, when you are assessing a market, right? You have to think that market is the king and you have to give it the due advantage. You have to analyze the trends and all that. That is more for a early stage startup or a Series A, Series B product, right? The second was more around you have gotten a market fit, right? You have gotten a product market fit, but you still can fail, and you have to keep watching the market because of that. And the third story is around a lot of us work in bigger companies and we launch products. The third story is around that, which is your core product market is not changing because there is a big team like 1,000, 2,000 people working on that. Amazon is not failing, Flipkart is not failing, Swiggy is not failing because there is a big team which is watching the core product and core offerings and core market. But then you launch a new product. You are you want to diversify, so you launch a new product. This is a story around that, and the story is Google Plus, right? I think a lot of us remember from 2011 when Google Plus launched. And I'll just kind of refresh your memory because I, for one, had forget what Google Plus stands for. All I knew was it started to kill Facebook, but couldn't do it, right? And just going through this video to kind of refresh that memory so that we can actually uh, find out what worked, what didn't work.
Much in thousands of years, and I think that they're still fundamentally driven by the same internal needs, the same desires, and the same kind of hopes.
Sometimes it's not relevant to talk about certain things with certain people, especially my guy friends, you know, that I don't fill them in on every aspect of my life, whereas I might with my girlfriends or my mom or whatever.
You know, like in your head, you assign everyone these roles, and like you think, you know, like these are the people that matter and these don't, and then like once you like step back and get away from that, you realize, oh, these are the
Just hold on. I think something happened.
once you like step back and get away from that, you realize, oh, these are the people that were actually there for me.
Yeah, I definitely think that when you're a child, when you're younger, it's just more about showing up and being at a place and then seeing what happens. Like the idea of like In school, you just have recess, and that's just a period of time for whatever you want to do, you can do.
There's nothing like a night that was not planned the way it was supposed to be planned. You feel like you are connected to a group of people. You feel like you're part of something.
I know that there are people who are just driven by kind of internal confidence that lets them see their path from here to there. I've never been that guy. I've always been part of a community, and I rely so heavily on the personal connections between me and the people who are close to me. It's fuel.
You know, when I saw it again, actually, I thought it was a great product, right? Like there was a very strong team behind this, and they actually built this to kind of compete with Facebook in 2011. And this looked a great product. Like if somebody could take you back to 2011, erase your memory and show you this, you will not be very sure that this will fail, right? And even the numbers that they reported in 2013 were healthy. Like if you are following the trend, they are saying that Facebook has 660 million daily active users. We have 350 million daily active users, right? And they are growing by 25, 26%. We are growing by 33%, right? So you will feel that, oh, the growth rate is higher and all that. So they are doing actually pretty good, but they're not doing very good. In 2015, if you see, they actually changed and introduced new Google Plus, which was more focused on following, because they said that you can follow some interests, you can follow some people, and that way I think maybe it will work, because that is what people are doing. So they saw what people were doing on Google Plus, they were following these interests and all, then they revamped it. And then in 2018, 19, 20, like it was dying, and finally it went into Google Graveyard. By the way, if you haven't known this, there's a website which is Google Graveyard. You can go there and all the Google products that have actually died listed there. So why it fails to make its mark, right? And these are the 4 points that I want to discuss. The first one is, I think understand why it was different from Facebook, right? So there is something called symmetric networks. There is something called asymmetric networks. Symmetric network is I follow you, you follow me. Something like a friend, adding a friend at Facebook or Instagram, unless they kind of give permission, you cannot do that, right? So I follow you, you follow me, like a Facebook or LinkedIn. Asymmetric is more of a follow on LinkedIn or Twitter, right? So Twitter is an asymmetric network because you follow a lot of celebrities and they don't have to kind of maintain the two-way relationship with you. Google Plus was more of a asymmetric. It was basically you can add people to your circles, and even if they don't approve or whatever, like you can just add them to your circles. In that way, it's a very asymmetric network, right? And we'll talk why asymmetric network has its own problems when it comes to social network. The second one is, the reason we use social network is because of two things. One is feel the personal connection. So at least Facebook was right about one thing. It was wrong about a lot of things, but it was right about one thing, which is human need for personal connection is there, which is I want to chat a friend on Messenger. I want to kind of ping a very old acquaintance from my school. I want to connect with them. I want to talk with them and all that. Possibly ask somebody on date, right? All those things are happening through one-on-one deep personal connection. And then there is a vanity to it, which is I'm broadcasting my life, my superior life to people who know, because it makes me feel important. It makes me feel good, right? And Facebook solves these two needs very, very easily. One through the news feed, right? And one through the messenger. So the fundamental difference between these two needs is the need for one-on-one actually is something where I want the other person to read for sure and reply for sure. In broadcast, I want a percentage of people to read through, because whatever I post, I do on newsfeed, not every one of my friends is going to see it. So Facebook solved the broadcast through ranking and relevance. The first one, they built a messenger. Then both products were very integrated, tightly integrated, right? Now, what happened with Google Plus is the need for one-on-one was not solved through Google Plus. It was solved through Hangouts, right? So then Hangouts become a very different product from Google Plus because you are going out of this and then you are going to Hangouts and then you are chatting there to whoever you want to chat to. You also don't want to add a lot of acquaintance to your Hangouts because Hangouts feels a lot more personal than Facebook. The second is, and your Hangouts is also associated with email ID and all, and you don't want to disclose your email ID to a lot of people and so on and so forth, right? The second one is broadcast, right? So in broadcast also, if I'm not sure that people are actually watching whatever I'm broadcasting, and this happened because I've added people to circles, but because it's an asymmetric relationship, they are not responding. They haven't even been to Google Plus, right? So I've added 50 people to my network, but I see that 35, 40 of them are not doing anything. So over time, that social proof start happening against Google Plus, which is the cool people are not using it, right? Because I have added them to circles, but they're not responding to it. I'm not getting any vanity based, like my pride is not going up or anything. And for one-on-one, I have to go to Hangouts, right? So it's not solving either of the purposes of which Facebook beautifully solved in one product. And that is why I think it fails to make its mark. And another big decision that they took in early days was actually lethal to this thing was that they said that we will make every Gmail user a Google Plus user, right? And because of which in a year, people started calling Google Plus a ghost town, where there are a lot of ghost profiles because those people themselves have signed up for inbox, but they haven't signed up for kind of Google Plus, so they're not coming there. So a lot of profiles are there, but the active accounts are very less, right? So the great power that you get as a bigger company, there is a greater responsibility to it, which is don't use it to do something which is not in favor of users, right? And if you analyze it through the asymmetric, asymmetric, the needs for social network, and what you did because you had great power from all these three frameworks, it becomes very clear that Google Plus will fail. And this is something that even people, engineers who worked on Google Plus have written about because one of the problems that again happens in bigger companies I haven't covered is the hippo problem, which is highest paid person in the room, right? The hippo problem is basically, if I know that this guy who is a VP who is earning 10 times more than I am earning, I will keep my reservations to myself. And that happens in bigger companies a lot, right? So there are a lot of people who raised voice, but then they ultimately shut up because they were like, okay, maybe these people are doing something which I don't know, right? And which is why I think companies actively like try to maintain that decorum of asking questions, right? You should keep asking questions because in any scientific process, like a single person, 100 people kind of confiding into something is important, but a single person raising doubt is also important because it is almost always that single person who goes through a breakthrough discovery, right? People who have aligned to the already conceived notions of science don't actually lead to anything new. But anyway, and then coming back to Twitter, right? So you might say asymmetric does not work. So why does Twitter work? And Snapchat, why did it work, right? And there are very clear kind of reasons for it. Twitter isn't a closed network. It didn't start on the fundamentals of an inbox, Google email inbox, right? Which is a very closed network. It says that there are celebrities, there is news, you can follow them. So it's mostly broadcasting, right? People are broadcasting to their audience, you are following them, and that's it. Snapchat, because yeah, like teenagers don't want to be on Facebook. I think once your parents are on Facebook, I think this is an experience all of us will share. It's very hard to kind of do anything, uh, anything cool on Facebook, right? So which is why Snapchat became a walled garden for kids because parents could not understand the complex UI, so they didn't go there. So kids are doing a party at Snapchat because parents are not there. It was also the timing. I think by 2018, there is already just one social network that is there. So a new thing comes along, which is cool. So teenagers want to try it, and those teenagers will ultimately become 20 to 30 age group, and they will ultimately kind of mature. So over time, I think over a span of 10 years, the TG changes because generation changes in 10 to 15 years, usually millennials, Gen Z, and all those things, right? So I think the idea here is, and this is something which I have always Yeah, sorry guys, I think the light went, and the power outages have become frequent nowadays because everybody is living at home. But anyway, I think I'll just conclude it here and move to the Q&A. So in the Q&A section, I think I will just go through the questions with a vote first, which is first, I think, in chronologically order. The Shubham has asked, like, I have 4 months to join my full-time job. How can you utilize 4 months from product perspective? What projects can I do? So I think, Shubham, rather than doing projects, I think they're always a good thing. If you have a developer friend, you can kind of work with them to kind of build some project. But if you can read a lot of blogs around product, if you can read a lot of books to build your understanding of design, growth, which is like business, and ultimately the tech, right? I think you will be very well positioned there, right? That is what I would suggest. In 4 months, it's very hard to kind of ship a product or kind of build a product. So go through all these topics. And what I'll do is, I think I'll share some resources, like which are the blogs that you can follow and read, right? When I'm sending back the email. Sashank has asked, suppose I launch an entirely new product, let's say Facebook, when none of the social media apps existed. Now, how do I run surveys that will help me as a PM get some solid feedback, because users at this point will probably say they do not need such products? Oh, great question. I think I love this question. When Facebook launched, I think first correction, there was already MySpace. So Mark Zuckerberg wasn't the innovator there. MySpace already had like 50, 60 million users. And Facebook was another social network that actually succeeded. See, the right question to ask here is something that I've covered in my 4th blog post, which is job to be done, right? If people are doing the same thing offline through some way or other, for example, people are connecting with each other, right? People are talking to each other, right? So which means that if you build something digitally, and email is working because people are talking to each other through emails. So if you build something digitally, that will also help, right? So look for the things that people are already doing and try to derive from it. For example, in Swiggy example, I said, right, when Swiggy launches, there's no food delivery app, etc. Some of them have failed and all. Like if you remember, Tiny Owl was there and it failed. The question to ask would be, does the business model make sense? But obviously you'll answer this. The second is, how big is the Maggie audience? Like, how many people are staying at home and eating substandard food, even if they have money, right? If people are already doing it, and Swiggy knew they were doing it, there is a market, right? And you can catch to these people, you can ask them if they would like to order food, etc., etc. And that is how most products get built, 0 to 1 product get built. So go for the job to be done framework. This is something which Clayton Christensen, the Harvard professor, had written extensively about. I'll share that as well in my link. Kalyani has asked, how do you choose between NPS and very disappointed? So I think Kalyani, NPS is something which is very useful once people have used your product, right? So how likely are you to recommend this product? Is some, you can ask this question mostly to people who are already in evolved stages of your product, right? But how disappointed is a very kind of early question that you can ask, right? And the thing is, the line is not that hard. I would say you can interchangeably kind of use these two questions to figure out the same answers from the audience. But it's just that the benchmark for both are different. Like for one, the benchmark is at 50-60%, for one, the benchmark is 40%. Add to that, NPS is, in my opinion, a lot less accurate because I am talking about that I will refer these people, which a lot of people say, but they don't do, right? So I would always opt for very, very disappointed question. And especially in early days, it is actually more relevant. NPS is for an evolved audience. Varun has asked how to measure PMF in super apps. Should the survey be run as a feature subcategory level or super app level? Is it possible that each feature on their own have PMF with the target subgroup, but as a whole lack coherence? I think I'll struggle to answer this question, honestly. I think in super apps, Varun, mostly subcategory level surveys should be rolled out to people who are already using this to figure out who are these people. And then once we figure out who are these people, we can see what percentage of the overall super app people are belonging to this subcategory. Because suppose you have gotten very good response in this group, like subcategory group, but this is, let's say, 18 to 24 years of age. This group is giving very good response, but this is just 1% of your overall app traffic. Then that means that this will not succeed in your app. Because the overall audience on your app that is coming, the whole notion of super app, which is a big distribution channel, and you're launching something new to take advantage of that distribution channel, is lost, right? So do at a subcategory level, but transfer that TG to evaluate how big the TG is on the super app level, right? And yeah, each feature can have their own PMF. Again, how much is that is the real question, which is like 10% of the overall super app audience actually likes that, or 20% or 30% will actually determine. So for example, I'll give you WeChat, right? So WeChat is a super app, it launched games, but WeChat ka 50% of audience, like of 800 million daily active users, 400 million daily active users actually play games. So that is where you say ki the games actually fit in the super app construct very well, right? Compared to that, if only 5%, 3% of your audience is doing that, there is still a long way to go in that sense, right? And also, I think one of the things that WeChat did, which actually answers the second part of your question, is the founder, Alan Zhang, he is very bullish about, we will not put any push notifications for all the super app constructs. So for chat, we will push notification because chat is the core of it. But for any other thing, the user should have enough pull to come and use that. And they don't provide any PN, just like Facebook Messenger games, okay, right? And that has actually worked for them, because you see 50% of people are actually going and playing without any added notifications. So the coherence has to be there, because in lack of coherence, you'll keep employing these non-organic methods of growth, just like I think Gmail did for Google Plus and Facebook did for Messenger games. Anyway. Hope I answered that. Like I said, I will struggle with the question because it's a very hard question to answer. What do you think is the incorrect heuristic principle that is used by most PMs? I think the most incorrect principle that is used by PMs is, I think I would call vanity metrics. I've seen a lot of PMs holding something that holds true for Facebook using the same thing for their app, right? Or something that holds true for Google using the same for their app. I think the metrics should change basis your monetization strategy, your product strategy, and your retention, right? So it should actually identify all three, but most PMs, I think they go after the shallow metrics, which are easier to meet, and they are happy by them. So it's not a principle, but I think the biggest mistake that a founder or PM does is measuring the product in the wrong way. Because once you start measuring it in the wrong way, you cannot improve it in the right way, right? But because what you're not measuring, you're not improving. So I'll give you a simple example, right? I think one of the key things when we are building games in MX Player was like, how should you measure it, right? Like, should it be DAU or should it be time spent, right? So daily active users is something which is used by a lot of gaming companies, but those are core gaming companies, right? So those are like, somebody is opening game because they want to play a game. But in a super app construct, a person can just come and kind of click on the game and not play the game and go out, right? So DAO is very easy to manage because you can send notifications, you can get accidental clicks, you can position the product in such a way that people are clicking on it. So DAO then fails to kind of measure the goodness of the product. Time spent, on the other hand, the more time people spend, the more is the monetization, right? So the first criteria is check the monetization one. The second is your product strategy to employ time spent will actually affect the DAU also, because time spent is daily active users into time spent per user, right? So that is also met. So your kind of monetization is met, your DAU is taken care of, your retention is taken care of. If people are spending more time, they will stick with the product. So that becomes a leading indicator of retention. You don't have to wait 30 days to see D30 if you're seeing that people are spending 30 minutes a day, right? So I think your product strategy, your monetization, and your leading indicator of retention are some things that should definitely meet your North metric that you're defining, or else it will fail. And that is the biggest mistake I see PMs making, by drawing analogies and using wrong metrics. Anyway, moving to the next. I have 5 years of experience in startups. How can I go about switching my career to product management? What would you recommend? I have a video regarding this, Mr. Anonymous attendee. I will share that on how to transition your career in product management. I did this when I was at Upgrad. What I would recommend is, if you are in startup, try to switch within the same startup in product roles. Talk to the product head or the co-founder and say you want this. It's much, much easier to shift in the same startup within 6 months than moving to some other startup in a product role. And once you have done that in the same startup, you can move to other companies very quickly. I did this, like I joined as a BI manager in housing. I went on to build the product analytics team. And then I moved to data science products. So I was PM for data science products and all, right? So great resources to learn. I think I already did a webinar on this. I'll share the webinar link. You can also go to Growth Catalyst, and you can see there is a video where there is a PPT where I have shared all the resources needed to become a product manager, right? But anyway, in the summary, I will answer all these questions. I'll add the resources and share it with you. Does it make sense to do a disappointment survey for product in pre-launch stage? So in pre-launch stage, in pre-launch stage, you cannot do a disappointment survey, because if they haven't used the product, they will not, they can't say whether they will be disappointed, right? So in pre-launch stage, you should do a lot of interviews. Like, you know, the TG, the Maggie TG, you go to them and you talk to them. Do you have money to order once a month? Kitne paise kharch karoge? And all that, right? And then what you have to do is, then once you have the minimum, like the beta, right? You can give to like 100 people, 200 people in a network to try, and then ask them this question. So I think after beta stage, this disappointment survey makes a lot of sense. Before that, you have to go and interview people in malls, in cafeterias, anywhere possible, but you have to interview people. You have to sit with them at least for an hour, right? To actually understand how they feel, how they think, and then devise your strategy from it. So no, not in the pre-launch stage. Beta and plus, I think you should use this. 40% magic number arrived at for the survey. I think this is something that Sean Ellis did. So Sean I think Sean coined the term growth hackers. He conducted this, I think he made this long list of startups who were using this survey, and arrived that people who had like 40% or plus were more kind of prone to success. Like, they did very well in the future, but people who had less than 40% actually didn't do very well. So it's not a step function. I think 38, 39 is still as good as 40, but you need to set some benchmark to chase, and that's where the 40% numbers comes in. And this is coming from like some analysis on 100, 150 startups that he got to know. Pooja has asked, let's say I'm targeting a market, housewives in tier 2, tier 3 cities. Okay. What percentage of audience need to use my product to say I have a PMF? Yes. So PMF is a moving target, right? I think one of the things that said, there is a definite audience. At least 500 people is what I have in mind, because see, your margin of error on any survey or anybody using your product depends on 1 divided by square root of n, right? So if you have 500 people using this or 1,000 people using this, you can actually use that as a sample size to extrapolate key. If I have 100,000 people, this is a broad numbers that it will look, right? So as long as you have 500,000 people in your TG, which is tier 2, tier 3 housewives, right? Those numbers will hold true with a margin of error of 5%. So your retention is, let's say, 50%. It will be between 45 to 55 when you move to 10,000 or 100,000 users, right? What you need to be careful is, right, is your TG. So for example, the problem that happens is not getting the first 1,000 users. It might happen that your product is doing very well in those 1,000 users. But as you move to 10,000 users, they don't have the same amount of money that they can spend as these 1,000 users. So these early adopters might be very different from your 10,000 user base. So that uniformity evaluation is very critical in this stage. So I would say read this on 1,000 or 500 people as well, but be sure that this 1,000 is equal to, in terms of their socioeconomic status, the mindset, language, blah, 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 to kind of address this 100,000 or 1 million audience that you're going for. Or else this assumption will not hold true because it's not apple to apple. And it does matter in PMF. So like, anyway, I answered that question. Does it matter in PMF? I think as long as you have 1,000 plus people in your audience, it does not. Pooja raised hand. Pooja, you can type another question here only, and I will take it up. So Kunal, I'll just take a moment to drink some water. I'll just read it. What is a good number to say that you have good retention for your product? And is it different for B2B versus B2C? Yes. So I think in B2C, anything, like I said, anything above 20% in day 30 is a good number, right? In B2B, you're not measuring in terms of day 30 or day 90. You're B2B, you're measuring in month 1, month 2, month 3 retention, right? And in B2B, I think this number goes up to like 70-80% for startups, like because the number of accounts are less. So in B2B, you have maybe 1,000 SMEs that you can reach in next 1 year. So if you lose 50% of them every month, you're not going to make your marks. In B2B, you have to retain more than 70-80% of your customers month on month, right? So maybe you should evaluate M1 retention, M6 retention, M12 retention, and so on. And that metric has to be up on north of 50%, which is not the case in B2C, where you can say that daily retention I will measure, and D30, as long as it's more than 20% is good, right? Users like Ola, but not Ola Money. Users Uber, not Uber Eats. FB, but not Messenger. How do you make these extensions and ensure they're like similarly to your core product? I think I'll cover a lot of this in the next month newsletter, which is around brand extensions, when they work, when they don't work, the positioning of product in the market and all that. And in there, I think I will also discuss these things: why Ola Money doesn't work, but Ola works; why Uber Eats doesn't work, Uber works; why Messenger people don't like, but WhatsApp, and so on and so forth. There are, I think, at the core of it, if you see, like there are product decisions and product principles these people made, which I will elaborate on. And the second is like the coherence, like what Varun mentioned earlier, like the coherence with the core product. Is it there, which actually make this successful or not? Just add to that, see, any super app within an app, right? If you launch an app within an app, what we have seen is the retention for an app within an app is much lower than the retention for a native app. So if Ola Money is a separate app and I'm downloading that app, my retention for Ola Money will be very high compared to Ola Money tab in Ola app. And that is something that you see across the universe, like Messenger games. It also happens with people like super apps like Grab and all, right? And I think I'll elaborate a lot on this because the world is moving towards this and we need to write on how to do the right go-to-market and positioning in this area. So next month, be ready for that. Yeah. What are the suggestions? Pooja, you didn't ask another question, so please feel free to ask because you raised a hand. We have 3 more questions to go. What are your suggestions towards students who are looking for product role with respect to PMF? How much importance should be given to PMF during our preparation? Any advice also? I think what PMF can give you, Jays, is it will give you something to talk in your interview around product strategy. And this is also relevant for product folks, like people who are in early stages of product management with 6, 7, 8 years, up to 6, 7, 8 years of experience. So what happens is, like when you go into the interview, interviewer likes if you talk about product strategy and all, and that is where product market fit, these keywords, actually understanding these helps a lot because you are able to dissect, present a framework and dissect any app that they ask you to talk about, right? And you'll always have an advantage because almost nobody talks about these things in the go-to-market or positioning or product market fit in their interview. So interviews are all about the advantage that you can build over other candidates. So as long as that is there, I think you can use these frameworks to discuss any product, right? And interviewers will love you for it. So yeah, I think there you have it, like lessen the competition, read this through and do the preparation, right? The advice is just go through the PPT that I talked about. I think I'll share the link also on what are the things which are important for a product management candidate and just try to cover all the points. Okay. Let's say, I think this is the last question from Pooja. Let's say the target audience for my product is 10 million people and my product is 3 months old and have 50 users. Oh, no, you cannot. So you have 50 users who are very enthusiastic about your product, right? So there is something called early adopters, right? And that is a framework that I'm going to write about and share to you guys also. So what happens is any product that you build will have some early adopters. Early adopters are people who are actually very enthusiastic about trying a particular kind of product, right? So which is why there's a lot of times people fall for the fallacy that there are these people who absolutely love my product and which is why it will succeed in the market. So 50 is not the number. I would still say, Pooja, if your TG is 10 million, then go for at least 1,000 people who love your product. Because then what will happen is, then even if, and you can do it very easily by kind of going through all these free distribution channels like YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook forums, all these communities you can go and you can promote your products. So if what happens is, what you have to achieve is a particular number of impressions. So suppose you posted in enough number of groups to get to 10,000 people ka reach, right? Now of them, if 10% or 5% are not converting, that is a problem because these people have seen your product in the groups being posted, but they're still not downloading it. So that is the first breakage point. And if these thousands are downloading, monitor their retention, right? If the retention for these 1,000, you already have a number prepared for VC that of 10,000 impressions, I get 1,000 people to try it. Of them, 500 absolutely love it. My retention is this much. And by the way, if I scale this 10,000 impressions to 100,000, this number will hold true because this is statistically significant. So not 50 users, I would say wait till 1,000 users and then I am definitely sure that you can talk about potential investors about PMF. Or else it will be a kiss of death, as we say in startups, which is you raise money, but because you don't have a PMF, you spend the money to acquire people who will not stick with your product and it will fail, right? I think, yeah, that's all. I think there is one about Varnak strategy. The last question I'm taking, which is online platform providing e-learning service. If for each course target customer segment is different, can each course be considered as a product? Yes, definitely yes. So the online platform is your distribution channel. But for a design course is very different from your product management course. And this is something that all these platforms are realizing, that unless you have made a commodity like Udemy or Coursera, you cannot treat your platform as a e-learning service. Like you cannot treat your platform as the product. For the platform to be product, there has to be enough supply and enough demand. But if you're building separate courses for separate verticals, right? Everything has a different product market fit. Like a data science course will have a higher product market fit than a product management course. And it might happen that a marketing course is not working at all. So totally go after that. This also happens, by the way, in e-commerce for categories, like some categories like fashion, mobile, they had early product market fit in Flipkart days. But something like a grocery, right, is something that even after operating for 10 plus years, it is not clear like how it is going to be. So if there are different distinct categories with distinct TGs, you have to figure out the PMF for each TG differently. Cool, guys. I think this was great. Around 90% of participants stayed till the end, which is great. What I would suggest is, if you like this, I think I'm going to write the post and share it with you guys. Just fill this survey. And if you don't like it, definitely fill the survey. I actually love feedback. And it is because of the feedback, we'll be able to make it a better thing than it is currently, right? So just be very candid in your feedback. And the only thing that I want from you is keep me honest. Help me build this community. If you can spread word, fine. If you don't want to, don't. But yeah, just keep me honest. Okay. Thank you all. Great session. It's 1.5 hours already. Have a good Sunday.